The FBI searched an elections office in Georgia on Wednesday as part of the Trump administration's investigation into the 2020 election. Here to discuss the legal ramifications for the raid and possible charges that investigators are seeking is the Hill's courts and legal reporter Zach Schoenfeld. Zach, let's start with the basic question. What happened in Georgia yesterday?
Hey, Judy, quite a surprise yesterday down in Fulton County, Georgia. This is the state's most populous county. It includes Atlanta and some of its immediate suburbs. And this raid took place in one of those immediate suburbs. You see, the images on your screen right there with FBI agents conducting a raid at what is essentially a warehouse-like facility where the county hosts and stores some of its election records, including, as relevant here, election records from the 2020 election, including ballots, ballot images, things like that. And all signals point to that is the subject of this raid and of this investigation. And Judy, when you think of a place like Fulton County, this isn't just any county. This is a county that has been a centerpiece of unfounded claims of mass election fraud back in the 2020 election. Of course, this is one of the places where we actually saw the president get indicted by a district attorney over the 2020 election. Charges brought by Democratic District Attorney Fani Willis accusing Trump and his allies of a criminal racketeering conspiracy to overturn Joe Biden's victory in the state. Of course, that case was dismissed after Fani Willis's romance with the top prosecutor in the case was revealed. Trump is now trying to seek attorney's fees. I say all that and give all that background just to say that when you think about now the FBI and the Justice Department putting their weight now behind this search warrant and seizing these ballots and conducting this investigation in a place like Fulton County, this has been a place that, of course, we have been talking about and has loomed large in right-wing circles for years.
Yeah, we've certainly been talking about Fulton County for years, as you say, Zach. Fulton County election officials just spoke to reporters. How are officials there responding?
They are very concerned, Judy. That is the message that we are hearing from them. They just conducted a press conference speaking to reporters. I'm just going to read you a quote that we just heard from Fulton County's chairman. He said, quote, "We do not know where our election records have been taken or what will happen to them now that they are out of our control." He went on to say that, quote, "We will not give 1 inch," end quote, to people who seek to control Fulton County's elections. That is the concern that we're hearing from county election officials at this point, Judy, is that they are concerned that the federal government is essentially doing this as an effort to somehow control Fulton County's elections. Of course, this raid and this search warrant's about 2020, but now we're starting to look ahead towards the midterms this year, and it's never, of course, too early to start thinking about the 2028 presidential election when no doubt Fulton County will be in the spotlight again. So they're very concerned, but the other thing that we heard at this morning's press conference, Judy, is that they don't have a lot of information about this investigation beyond what I just told you. They said they, just like us, have a lot of questions at this point.
Yeah, Zach, what do we know about what the FBI was looking for and the warrant is served during that raid?
Yeah, we are getting some answers from that search warrant. They did conduct this raid after getting a search warrant before a magistrate judge in Georgia. And to get that search warrant, you have to, lay out, some of what you're looking for and some of what gives you the legal grounds to do so in writing to that magistrate judge. The Hill, we have not obtained this warrant, but several outlets have. And so we have seen that they've published copies of it. And according to that warrant, it lists what the FBI agents were authorized to seize. And it indicates that they were authorized to seize ballots from the 2020 election, ballot images, and various other records related to the 2020 election. These records, counties always keep these, have to retain these for a certain amount of time after the election. But here we are going on 5-6 years afterwards. And the reason that Fulton County, part of the reason they still have all these records and ballots is the fact that the 2020 ballots have been under long-running litigation that has forced them to preserve them for all of these years. So that's why they've been in this warehouse. And this search warrant, according to the terms of it, that is what the FBI was seizing yesterday.
Is there any word on possible charges the investigators may be seeking and what those mean?
We do have word on that. That is another clue that we got in this search warrant because they had to tell the magistrate judge in Georgia, what this criminal investigation was about and what the possible violations of the law that they believe that there was potentially a violation of, and that gives them cause to go get these records. So I'll walk you through the 2 statutes that are in this reported search warrant. The first is a statute that makes it a crime if election officials do not properly retain election records, like I just mentioned. There's that certain period period of time. It's generally 22 months after a federal election, where election officials all across the country have to hold on to those records related to presidential and other federal records. Now, obviously, we're now in 2026, that 22-month period after the 2020 election has passed. So we've got some questions about that. And then the other statute, Judy, that it was mentioned in this warrant is one that there's a few different ways you can violate it, but one of the ways is it makes it a violation, a crime for election officials to willfully defraud state residents of a fair election. So at least as of this point, those are the two charges the Justice Department seems to be looking at. But of course, that does not mean that as we move forward, that those charges couldn't change.
Looking forward, Zach, what should we be keeping our eyes on related to this investigation?
I think one key thing to keep an eye on was a really other interesting element from this reported search warrant, and that is the prosecutor on this case. Of course, so many of the cases, Judy, that you and I have been talking about since President Trump took office a year ago, we've been talking about some of these various U.S. attorneys where Trump has appointed. We've been talking about Lindsay Halligan, who's now left the Justice Department, but for a while was the top prosecutor in a U.S. attorney's office in Virginia. But of course, now we're talking about Fulton County in Georgia. This is the Northern District of Georgia, a different U.S. attorney's office. So, of course, naturally, you'd think, that this perhaps would have the involvement of the U.S. attorney's office down in Fulton County in the Northern District of Georgia. But Judy, the interesting thing about this search warrant is that the prosecutor who is listed on the search warrant is not from Georgia, but instead is the interim U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Missouri. So as this investigation moves forward, particularly if they truly do bring any charges, I'll be watching to see not just what's in those charges and what the allegations are, but also who's on that signature line at the bottom of the document.
We know you're always on top of all of it. Zach Schoenfeld, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.